Good morning, good noon, good afternoon, good evening, good night. It is your Olinda here again, bringing you the new episode of Opera Wars. And today we're talking about La Traviata at the Metropolitan Opera. Uh, as what I'm aware of, the first time I know the Met put on La Traviata was in the 22 to 23 season, and I don't remember if they had it the season before last season, nor last season, but I do aware of the fact that Metropolitan Opera was trying to cut budget. And of course, the best way to save money while creating some revenue is to have those world famous opera played with those sopranos who can sell a ticket. And today we have the soprano Lisette of Oropesa, who is definitely a massive ticket seller, and the Met embraces her a lot, I guess. And I do want to draw some personal connection. I remember when I was in China with my grandfather, who absolutely don't know anything about opera, but he was pretty into Western literature, and I was like, yeah, I like opera. And the first thing he asked me is if I've ever been to La Traviata live before or not. And this is actually my first time seeing La Traviata live, and I think it's one of these operas just follows you and choose you, I guess. Is always the first piece that the other people tell you to listen to, and I do have several friends who just had their first opera in their entire life this season with La Traviata, and I think everyone is just crying over La Traviata, and is a love story, and is mm, a love story that is alike those Italian Verdi production, I guess, and is I guess like one thing I would like to say is that people fall in love and die all the time, but somehow La Traviata is just something more, and especially when you're actually in the house, it just hits differently. And the Mad production pro- is kind of that process for me, and is the entire stage isn't new nor experimental, but it's just a production that kind of just, I guess, stays with you. And I watched this production once before, a recording from the 22 to 23 season, and nothing changed from there because it's a repertory. But uh, I guess I do have something to say about it. So of course, La Traviata was by Verdi, and it was premiered in 1853, and it was based on The Lady of Camellias, which is Le Dumas et Camellias, by a famous French author called Dumas. And uh, the story is about Violetta, a courtesan in Paris, who fall in love with Alfredo, and they try to live a normal life, but the society was rejecting this combination. And Alfredo's father shows up and emotional, emotionally manipulates Violetta into leaving Alfredo. And Alfredo was mad, and he humiliates her publicly. And then he realized, oh, he's stupid. And then he was trying to pray for her to come back. But unfortunately, Traviata dies of tuberculosis, and that's basically it. And I guess honestly, the plot is simply straightforward. The Verdi structures the music around the tragedy of Violetta is almost like three distinct operas in one opera, because Act 1 feels brilliance and surface, and Act 2 starts to dig into the control and sacrifices, and Act 3 is when everything just collapsed. And that's why this is a typical for this is not like the most typical for the opera, but this is one opera that highlights the soprano figure because you need to be able to handle all these three acts that emphasize a transition in the social role and also Violetta, the figure herself and her emotional states. And things could simply fall apart, so I guess that's why we absolutely need a sad opera. And this is one of the performance, and you just sit there and amazed by the soprano, cause Opera's Act 1 is ridiculously clean, especially the famous aria Simple Libera, right? I must always be free. And I heard Renee Fleming's recording before with the Royal Ballet and Opera. That was already 11 years ago when that recording was uploaded. And of course, Renee Fleming was kind of young at that point. And I think what Oprisa did that I really like is that it was more controlled in a way that feels intentional, and the runs are even and the top notes are placed without getting pushed. And most importantly, she wasn't just trying to flex her techniques because there's a bunch of high notes in the aria. Is you can actually hear Opera's trying to depict the character and try to convince herself to stay free. And there's this kind of nervous energy underneath the coloratura, which I really like. And Act 2, Operissa darkens the tone a little bit, especially in the garment duel, which I think this is where she slows that she actually understands the role structurally because she stopped seeing everything the same way and the sounds has more weight but still flexible, and some sopranos just go full lyric here and lose the agility, but like I guess a person just has both, and that's what makes her performance brilliant. And in Act 3, the voice becomes thinner as Violetta's condition got worsened, but it was more in a controlled way. Like she actively tried to manage it into a state of fragility, and the phrase stretched and the breathing becomes a part of the line, and suddenly everything just feels very intimate and is not too loud, not too dramatic in a traditional sense, but is devastating, and that's hard to do without just sounding tired. And just to say, it is also a long road to come to the character Violetta in the way, because operas has done Lucille, Gilda, and all these bel canto roles for many years, and the control was already built into her and is not random, and is this kind of consistency in her voice and in the fact that why audiences we all like her. And Alfredo was played by Pietro Bezowski. He sounds nice, like genuinely nice. It was clean and lyric, very pleasant to listen to, and honestly, that works for Alfredo because Alfredo is basically just a man child if we put into the 2025 vocabulary. And he has minimum self awareness, and just he just has a pretty useful mindset. And I guess that's where Bezovsky's sound fits. But sometimes I do want more presence, especially in Act 2 when he's supposed to be angry and dramatic at Violetta, but it still sounds a little bit too polite. And especially considering the plot, like, Alfredo just ruined Violetta's life, and I guess Alfredo could sound a little bit more unhinged. Is a great scene and a pleasant scene, but is not that interesting. And we also have Luca Salsi as Germont, and it was so traditional and very Italian baritone, and the legato is there, and the phrasing is just pretty proper, and there's just no surprise. Oh, okay, now the production, I think, is just visually nice and slightly styled. It's not that busy, not that empty, not that experimental. The costumes are pretty just as the 18th century France, and the set moves smoothly. It's just those based on, not really based on, it's those great map productions that you would be expect, not the level of production presented in Carmen. However, I guess the starting scene was pretty funny, seeing Violetta on her bed and everyone partying around her. I guess that contrast just made me feel pretty interesting. Right? It was kind of funny, not gonna lie. But everything else is pretty efficient. And the orchestra and conductor, the performance I went to is the one with Antonello Manacota. His conducting was just pretty restrained in a way, which I think mostly works, and the orchestra are supposed to support the singers and instead of overpowering them. And the pacing was pretty stable, especially in Act 2 and 3. The balance was quite great, but sometimes I do feel like it's a little bit too safe, and Traviata actually has a lot of emotional extremes, and that's where the climax of this opera is. And if you're playing everything too carefully and too precisely, it kind of loses some tension. And there were moments where I wish for a little bit more contrast, more risk, and more push in the phrasing. Is not a particularly memorable conducting, but overall is one of those performances that is stable and somewhat something that I would recommend to people who's never been in an opera house before. It will be a great experience, and everything is just pretty great. And honestly, is one of those constant is one of those operas that opera put on once in a while. So the entire opera was pretty stable, and it's something that everyone likes. So anyway, thank you so much for listening. And if you have any questions, comments, or opinions on what I said, please email me at aulindatang@gmail.com. It is aulindatang@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening, and see you in the next episode. It will most likely be about the Innocent, and I just purchased the ticket and I can't wait to see it.